You're on.
Great, thank you. Well, welcome all. I'm so excited to see you and to have you here. My name is Heather Monty. I'm the development director of the Clubhouse Network. I wear sort of two hats. I fundraise network-wide, and then I also fundraise for the flagship Clubhouse in Roxbury, Massachusetts. So yeah, that's about me. This session, you're at right now, funding tomorrow by building relationships today. So, today we're really hoping to hear from our three amazing panelists, our lovely guests that we have in this space with us, and really learn some transferable skills. So this is about having the chance to hear from funders and hear what they're looking for, how we can build these strong relationships, and then hopefully we can all go back to our individual clubhouses and have the skills to be able to, build these amazing relationships with funders in your city and your region. So that's the goal of today. With that in mind, I would highly encourage, if at all possible, for you to turn on your camera if you're here with us live. In the spirit of building relationships, it's so nice to see a face nodding along or smiling back at you, or even sometimes looking a little puzzled, right? That's a good thing too. Totally understand if there's baby or if there's, a little noggin that runs by or an occasional critter that comes into the screen. We understand all of that. So if you're able to join us, with your camera on for any or all of the session, that would be wonderful. So, I love cats on Zoom too. So I would love to start before our panelists introduce themselves, learning a little bit about who's in the room. So I'm thinking maybe we could, in the chat, we're going to do a 1 to 10 scale. So I want to know about your proximity to fundraising. So 1 being, fundraising is something that you think you should be doing, you're curious about, but maybe you aren't doing right now in your role. And then 10 being, gosh, I do this every single day. That's the primary focus of the work that I'm doing. So I know there's so many hats that you all wear. So if you could just 1 through 10 in the chat, we'll see those all tick in and get a sense of our proximity to fundraising. Great, wow. We've got a really broad spread. This is wonderful. Okay, so I really hope that you all are going through and looking. There are some people who are on the lower side of the scale. So those might be our clubhouse coordinators or folks that are more in the programmatic side and are thinking, gosh, I gotta get some money going on for this program and I want to learn what it's all about. And then there are some folks who maybe are development directors or who are executive directors and really spend a lot of time going through and doing a lot of that fundraising. So I think we'll all learn something. I hope that we create a really strong community vibe where we're all contributing and finding little kernels to take home with us. I do want to make sure everyone knows at the end we're going to try and leave some time for some audience questions. So if along the way you're thinking, wait a second, I need to hear more and we just don't cover it, save that because I'd love to hear and I know our panelists would too. All right, well, with that, I would love for the panelists to introduce themselves. So as a reminder, we're hoping to hear your name, your gender pronouns. I used the she series, sorry, I didn't say that in the beginning, but then your job title. And, it'd be great if the panelists, you could share just a few words about why you enjoy the work that you do. So with that, Bryan, would you kick us off?
Sure, happy to. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Heather and Gail, who I had a chance to speak to a couple of weeks ago, and who I know a little bit through our funding. Bryan Spence, he series. I'm a senior program manager at the Liberty Mutual Foundation. I'm based in Boston. We fund in Boston and have smaller programs in Seattle and Texas. Let's see, and you wanted to know what makes me happy about my job? Is
Yeah,
that kind
something
of
you
it?
enjoy, a little fun truth.
Well, actually, my career has been in both corporate philanthropy. I'm also a trustee at a small private foundation. And I've also been on the fundraising side for the past decade or so, been a chief development officer at a few different organizations. And I got into all of this uh, pretty much through, being a client or guest at nonprofit organizations growing up. My first summer job was through a federal grant that a community development center had, and some of my summer camp programs were through nonprofit organizations in the Boston area. So I'm very happy to be on the side of helping with fundraising and also with grants.
That's great. Thank you so much and welcome, Brian. I'd love, Caitlin, would you like to go next?
Absolutely. Hi, everyone. I'm Caitlin Comer, She Series. I am a senior global community engagement specialist at Boston Scientific. I'm based out of Marlborough, Massachusetts, but we have some other offices closer to Boston, Quincy, Cambridge, and we fund across the US as well as some sites globally. We work with some global teams to do that as well. And what I love about my job is really connecting with organizations like yours in the community and seeing what the overall trend is across communities, how all of these organizations are working together in one way or another to really make an impact for the populations there.
Thank you, Caitlin. And certainly not least, but last, we do have Rodrigo. And it's kind of a fun bookend because I think, Rodrigo, you also have a great story of being in program as well as on the funder side.
That's absolutely right. So, hi, my name is Rodrigo Guerrero. I use the He series. I'm originally from Venezuela, and I'm currently working with New England Conservatory as Assistant Director for Creative Youth Development. But my connection to the Clubhouse and to the conversation today comes from my previous post as Program Manager for Creative Youth Development at the Massachusetts Cultural Council, where we funded creative youth development programs across the whole of the state of Massachusetts. Um, my What makes me happy about my job and having worked both as a program person, as a grants as a grants officer, and as a board member to other nonprofits as well, it all comes from the same impulse, which is, when you have a network, how can you make that network work for others? How can you get someone to introduce to someone that can help them do the work better and widen the impact of things that we love? I typically work, the bulk of my expertise comes with the arts. I used to work for the National System of Orchestras of Venezuela, known as El Sistema. I came to Massachusetts to work with creative youth development, and I'm now currently with the New England Conservatory. So a lot of my background is in music. So my love of music and my love of the arts and saying, I want to make this worthwhile and I make this, the impact wider. How can I get people to meet each other and widen that impact? That brings me a lot of joy.
Thank you. Yes, we have certainly a lot of knowledge in this room. So our virtual space, I'm really excited about that. Thank you all for your intros. I would love to start off with a question, and each of you can answer this, and let's just get friendly. So just jump on in, please. So what do you look for in your community partners?
And I'm happy to kick off. So at Boston Scientific, we're really focused on STEM education, which is where we kind of align to the work that you do, as well as health. But when I am looking for new STEM education partners in the community, I'm really looking for organizations that are reaching populations in unique ways and really filling a need for those underserved and underrepresented groups of kids in our communities who don't have access to that kind of opportunity in any other way. I really look for organizations that have authentic missions, who are truly connected to the communities that they work with, and are constantly assessing their programming and understanding how that impact is happening in the long run and making changes as they need to meet the needs of their target population.
Right. So from the Mass Cultural, my experience at the Mass Cultural Council, which is a fairly interesting funder in the sense that being the state's art organization, they fund very, very widely, although not large grants. But because they're a state organization, they have the mission of funding as widely as possible and creating opportunities for younger organizations, starting organization, or even well-established organizations to be part of the pool of funding. So one of the things that Mass Cultural Council does really, really well is making sure that even though the funds are not massive, the process serves as a vetting mechanism for other funders to come in. Once Mass Cultural Council funds an organization, the organization instantly, gains some kind of vetting with other organizations as well. What Mass Cultural Council really looks for, particularly in creative youth development enterprises, such as the ones that are typically fall within the Clubhouse parameters, are organizations that have a clear commitment to public impact through public benefit, through quantifiable asset-based and data-driven programming. And this sounds like a lot of words, but actually what it means is that there needs to be a commitment organization-wide to understand the purpose of what we do and how we measure its impact and how we tell the story about how that impact comes in within the community.
Yeah, and I would add on, some similar comments. We really do look for organizations that are community-based, that understand their populations, as Caitlin was saying. That's really important to us. In a way, we look for organizations that are experts in their field, not only the people they serve, but the broader, what's the national outlook, changes that they're seeing and that they're able to address. For us, we also really, we have a significant volunteer program. We have a large employee base, and our employees are really interested in, serving not only organizations that they know, but learning about other organizations. And so, that kind of additional opportunity is really helpful as we talk to organizations. The last piece I would want to say is that we really are looking for partners in organizations that it won't be just a transactional, here's a proposal, here's a grant, yes or no, but building relationship over time with organizations and organizations that are willing to do that.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah, that's great. I think I saw in the chat too, someone highlighting the reciprocity and sort of that partnership building. Yeah, I think if we were to kind of make a word cloud of all of the things that you just shared with us, that hearing community based and data driven, being authentic with your mission and making sure the community, networking was great, relationship building. I loved that, touching on the idea of not only is it that the community organization would have the opportunity to potentially network, but vice versa. Employees are getting a sense of all the different organizations where they work and where they live, and connecting everyone together. I think that's great. Yeah, thank you. Our next question is, what should a clubhouse have prepped in advance of their first meeting with you? So this is the very first time, maybe you've had an email or someone's helped make the connection. What should they have prepped?
I can jump in on this one. And as I had mentioned, I've been on the fundraising side and on the giving side. So, it's when I have that first meeting, I'm really looking to be open as I can be about our program, but hoping that the person I'm working with will be as open as they can about their organization. Sometimes if it's a program person, for instance, which happens often, not the development person, I do, have the expectation that they'll have the bigger picture organizational viewpoint as well, so that they'll know things like, the organizational budget as well as the program budget. They'll be able to speak a little bit about the board as well, and be able to speak a little bit to the strategy going forward. Is there a new strategic plan? What are the big things? And also, just as I said earlier, that overall look of the field, what's happening, not only for your organization and the people that you serve, but what's happening in the larger city, the state, and nationally as well. That's all information that just, helps me as a funder, getting to know someone, know that not only are they invested, but they've put the time in to learn more about the organization and also the why, the why you're serving the people you serve, what the real need is in that population. Um, one of the things, particularly now when fundraising is is difficult for many organizations, and meeting with people is different. Every call I have, I'm asking, tell me about your financials. What are your plans? If you're not able to do your in-person events and that money isn't available, kind of what are you thinking about how to proceed and move forward with that?
Yeah. Those are great points. And I think, in addition to that, something that I'm always appreciative of when I start a new relationship or have a first meeting is when the organization has taken a look at what we're publicly saying, what Boston Scientific says externally that our focus is, and what we have out there for our community focus and our DE&I focus, because I'm doing that research before I'm going to a meeting as well. I'm looking into your mission, trying to find those connection points and those synergies so that, I want to have all those things that Bryan was talking about as well. But by the end of the conversation, I want to start getting into those, really specific examples of where partnership opportunities might exist. What can we build upon? Where are those really good fits for the two of us? And I always appreciate when, the partner comes to the table, having done a little bit of that research as well.
Here to that. Of course, yes, we typically, when we are brought to the table, we will do a little bit of homework coming in, or we expect to find some data if available. With the Mass Cultural Council, there's a caveat to that, which I think is one of the coolest things of the organization itself, is that it will fund programs in design. So, a lot of the times we're going in very, very blind, just going with whatever information we've got from the applicant, where there's no website, where there's nothing else. What I really would like to see going into those conversations, it's clarity of purpose, because a lot of this is driven by the idea of public benefit, and public benefit seems like a very, very generous and ample kind of the Terminator. But at the same time, I want to be clear that, for example, with the arts programs, you're not just doing arts because arts are cool. You're not doing this just because you think, keeping kids busy after school is what's going to do it. You got to be able to describe, at least to some measure, the kind of impact that you want to have in your participants and in the community and into the field at large. And if I get that clarity on, because we work with a lot of programs in planning, then we can deploy resources in helping create those tools that will help them help programs articulate those things better. I keep saying this, that development is not a thing that rests within the development officer only, but the more I work in the field, I've come to realize that development is something that happens with every member of the organization realizing that what they do impacts on what the organization reports out to funders and the public at large, and that will benefit the growth of the organization. So having that clarity, that baseline clarity as to what the organization is intending to do, is a fantastic starting point for those conversations, so that we as funders, in the case, in that case, is what resources can we deploy? How much time do we have? How much help is this organization going to need in drafting the ever dreadful logic model, that let us see what, how we are going to quantify that impact.
Mhm.
But yes, clarity of purpose is really, really important to me.
That's great. Thank you. I was, while I was listening, I couldn't help but wonder. I feel like I have these questions sometimes, and I imagine other folks in the room do too. How do you like that information to be communicated? Some people are like, it's got to be the old school, the PowerPoint slide deck. Some people, no, I want a conversation. Do you have any advice for how folks should be communicating that information, especially in an early contact with you?
So for programs in planning, that is a very, very tricky one, because of course we will always rely on story-driven narratives, right? We want to hear, what changes have you elicited through your existence? But if you're a program in planning, how do you create the narrative? And that's where the clarity of purpose and a data-driven design helps us have a better picture as what could be achievable. So I think it's an interesting question in the sense that it's different for the type of program. For an existing program, you always need to make sure that whatever data you're presenting is accompanied with enough story that lets us see the human aspect that is being changed by the existence and the influence of your work on the community and on the individual. For programs in planning is, having that clarity again of what impacts I want to create and how am I going to measure them and how am I going to report them out. We at Mass Cultural Council, we worked a lot with logic models, and we actually worked very, very closely with organizations in planning and helping them develop those logic models. But even having an idea of what an outcome-based programming looks like from the get-go, before we even have conversations about logic models and everything else, helps us know for programs in planning that you really know what you want to do and you really know what you want to get out of it, so that we can get it. And if that's a narrative, if that's a PowerPoint slide, I don't care. I really want to see that that bit of data that you're going to produce that is good, that we're going to be able to leverage in your favor.
Yeah. And I will say that, once you have some of that data in hand, once you've completed a program or you're reporting back out or you're coming to us saying, this is how many kids that I've, impacted in the last number of years, having it on paper is always helpful, I find, to refer back to. When I'm coming back to our relationship or coming back, 6 months later to have a conversation or following up on a grant that was provided, I love having those face-to-face or screen to screen conversations, to build that relationship. But having it on paper somehow is always good for me to go back and reference. And, from the internal side in Boston Scientific, I'm asked all the time, can you give me an example of an organization that does this, or a grant that you gave that does this, or do you have a story that fits into this news article? And having those things on hand is always really nice to pull back to and reference.
Coming from another corporation, very similar to what Caitlin was saying. And, I love to have as much information. I love to have the conversations, but at some point, I need to summarize and, easily grab information about an organization. So, and partly it's my corporate background too. I love bullet points. I love PowerPoints. But at some point in the process, there's a possibility that I'm going to have to present to someone else who's going to ask a lot of these questions. So it's one of those situations where I need a large amount of knowledge about the organization, about the program, about the impact, about who's served. But I also need to be able to easily boil it down to share that with someone else. So I'm kind of saying a little bit of everything.
Mm-hmm.
And I would also say that it differs for different organizations. I mentioned I'm a trustee at the Clippership Foundation here in Boston, also in my spare time. And we don't have staff, it's board driven. So we don't have the time to do the type of work the way I do it at Liberty, which is, I'll schedule phone calls, I'll do a back and forth. So really, you need to know a little bit about the organization to try and sense or learn what information they're looking for and how they'd like to see it.
Yeah, so in many ways, it seems like maybe the best thing to do is when you have those initial meetings, come prepared with a little of everything. But then after that, ask, would you like to see, it would be helpful if we wrote up a white paper? Would it be helpful if I sent over a couple slides? Is this something that you're sharing with others? What can I do to support that? And in so many ways, I think, Bryan, you were touching on this, like, we know ourselves best. And so isn't it really helpful when the organization, is able to write about their own stories, their own experiences, rather than relying on the funder to remember what happened in that 45-minute call, and as excited as they were, write it all out and share with others. That's very helpful. So let's maybe fast forward a bit. So, you've got this great relationship, things are going well. And outside of the granting process, I'm curious in hearing how often you like to hear updates from organizations that you support, and what are the updates you like to hear? So everything from, oh my gosh, sign me up for your newsletter, I'll see it all, to, well, I would love if you offered a half-hour phone call once every 6 months or once every year. What do you like yeah, what contact you like, and what do you like to hear about?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like at least twice a year is nice to do the check-in. I feel like, yeah, on our end things get away from us too. If I think about last year, I had no concept of time whatsoever, and it's sometimes things fall off my radar to check in as well, but having those twice a year check-ins is always good because so much changes so fast on both sides. And it's not only my world that there are connections to what you guys are doing, sometimes even outside of the granting, like you said, there are other connections that I might want to make with our DE&I councils or employee resource groups, or other people who are looking to do outreach in the community, that knowing what you're up to and your latest initiatives, even if I have no additional funding that year or their grant process isn't live right now, helps me be able to make those connections more readily when I'm talking to other people at the company and say, have you heard of the Clubhouse Network? They're doing this great thing. It's exactly what you guys are kind of looking to do. And so, yeah, I would say, every 6 months is great, just to kind of stay on each other's radar and get those updates, just a quick 30 minutes. Not that those are meetings you would need to prepare for a lot in advance. I think we probably all agree that my goal is never to create work for you on your end to come, with a big presentation or anything like that. I want the relationship to be really authentic, but having those updates, and you guys reached out to me not that long ago to do this, and it was wonderful, to hear what's going on, the latest, your plans, what you've heard from your club members and the kids that you serve. Those are things I love to have, readily available for when the right connection or the right way to work together comes up.
Caitlin, I think I'm agreeing with you again on just about everything you said. It's a corporate thing,
Yeah.
but we at least once before a new application or renewal grant proposal, would have a conversation certainly, but happy to speak, additionally throughout. And a lot of times it's when there is a major organizational change, for instance. So if an executive director is changing or there's an issue with a program that's going to have to shift, we'd like to hear that and just have a chat about it. And so those types of things, I do sign up for newsletters and look at them. It's hard because we get them from so many organizations. So, it's, I do try to quickly scan to see kind of what, really catches my attention. But if there's something, if someone from an organization were to re-forward it with a note saying, just wanted to make sure you saw this, that will definitely grab my attention. So I guess I'm just saying that we're open to having the conversation, keeping in mind that we get a huge number of emails from a lot of organizations and not always able to respond.
Here. On my end, I will say, typically grants will come with some, built-in reporting times. There will be a checkup every once in a while. And my advice is make the most of the time that is allotted to you by design within the grants. If you have a check-in with your funder, make sure that you make the best of it. It's not just about producing the numbers and making sure that it's there, but and I keep thinking of the fact that the word reciprocity came so early in the chat box. Make use of that time. Make sure that you are speaking with the funder of the good and the bad, and see where we can leverage our connections, our know-how to help to make things better. And at the same time, it's finding those spaces where reporting out, just as Bryan was saying, we do get the newsletters and we do try to read as much as we can. But if you feel that there's something that we should know about, don't be afraid to reach out and point it out to us and say, hey, the last email we reported this out, just making sure that you caught it, or give us just a little bit of a comment. We typically work really, really hard in making sure that you folks succeed. So the more we know, the more we can leverage, towards your benefit as well.
Yeah, and just to follow up on the making use of the time, if we have a meeting set, I am looking for the organization to lead that. What do you want to share with me? As opposed to sometimes I've had meetings where they've said, "So, what do you want to get out of this?" Well, no, it's really about what do you want to share with me. I want it to be a conversation, obviously. If it's an organization that I know, well, I know you, so we don't have to go through that, but just to have your own plan about what you're hoping to really share, the most important things you think you want to share with the organization.
That's very helpful. Yeah, knowing kind of the idea of who's taking the lead, I think is so important. So it's great to hear that. And I loved the tip. I think that's successful for foundations, corporations, individuals. If you can ever try and just forward a newsletter or forward, some exciting social media post and just have a sentence or two. Hey, I just thought you would love this. Wanted to pass it on. I think that that's such great advice and definitely worth trying. And especially in our world where inboxes are always full. It's always good to see it, have another chance to see that. Yeah. I think, Caitlin, you had sort of touched on this. So I'm kind of curious to learn a little bit more about, so say a clubhouse comes to you and it's not really quite the right fit in the right time. You had mentioned a little bit of this idea of, well, it's still great to have the update because even if there's not maybe granting dollars in that moment or a deadline right away, there's still kind of things that are churning in your minds as funders and ways you can connect. So that makes me wonder, can can organizations ask for help with networking? And if so, how do they go about doing that? How do they gleefully accept that idea that you'll keep them in the back of your mind and maybe pass them on to a colleague at another organization?
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, absolutely. That's part of what building the relationship is all about. If you're struggling in a certain area or there's a certain kind of company you want to bring on board because you want to make sure your kids are getting exposed to those careers, or, what's great about the role that I'm in is that other people in the community, other companies who have similar roles, we're not competing, we're working together. A lot of us have the same goals to impact the community for the better. And so there's a lot of networking groups between all of us where we're kind of working together and talking about our experiences and organizations that we love, and ways that we are able to flex volunteer opportunities last year to be virtual, and all of those things. So I'm always happy to kind of hear what's going on with you and the things that you guys are looking to do. I never really know how another company is going to respond or another contact's going to respond, but I'm always happy to make introductions or let you know if I feel like there's a fit or not a fit based on what I may know about that person. And even internally at Boston Scientific, like I said, there are other groups that have, other pools of small funding or certainly very engaged volunteers, who may look to do things that may be a match for what you guys are doing. And we've done this a couple times before with our co-ops and some of those groups that come in, who want to do some volunteering. And what I will say in that space is always happy to make those connections, but please continue to keep me in the loop too. It's good to be the main contact so I know the whole picture of what Boston Scientific is doing to support these partner organizations. But absolutely, the relationship should go both ways and we should leverage the benefits on both sides.
Yeah,
That's great. Yeah. Oh,
there's one thing that I wanted to mention, just that, given this time last year and this year, we've done kind of outside of our normal grant making COVID response grants. So large grants that we've made in, around vaccine outreach, around testing last year. And to make those, it wasn't your typical, well, it wasn't a request process. It was us reaching out to organizations that we know and those that we don't, and asking for information just because we saw them as experts in that field, for instance. And that's been a really kind of enlightening for us, and I think for organizations, because it's really based on kind of awareness of organizations' expertise, and it's that kind of back and forth reciprocal relationship that we're starting very early with organizations sometimes that we had no relationship with.
Thank you. Yes, that's all good to think about and keep in mind. I think sometimes, you know, it can be intimidating, but you know, I hope if anything you walk away from this hour and just feel the kindness and the genuine interest that I really feel. You know, all the funders that we have the honor of working with, you know, really hold in their hearts. So definitely reach out and say, gosh, can you think of anyone else that, or, you know, maybe you want to share this with someone else in your company or in your foundation, your organization. And, you know, Bryan, I think you mentioned it too in your intro, lots of times folks wear multiple hats. So, you know, they might have a day job and then they might have all of their other passion projects and hobbies and personal networks. And you never know when someone's going to be thinking of you. So always good to make those check-ins. Yeah. Let's see, we have a couple more questions and then I see some in the chat too. So I do want to make sure we give way to those as well. Let me see here for what we have on our list. I think, you know, I just would be curious out of all of this, what can an organization do to stand out? You know, whether that's with their programs or how they communicate. What advice do you have?
I think I said it already in the chat box, but it's worth voicing out loud, particularly with youth-oriented programming. To me, it's always very, very powerful when I see a young person from the program, whether lead or be a major part of the reporting out. When we see that amount of ownership coming from a young individual that understands the role of the program in their community or in their own lives, that is tremendously impactful. And like I also said, it helps things that are quantitative become qualitative by having someone really represent that kind of power. That's something that always stands out to me. Just how powerful youth voice is within a program beyond tokenism and actually being an integral part of the operation of the program. So youth voice is a major, major thing for me. And Gail has done this very well in the past, I've said before.
And I think we all kind of said this once or twice already, but that authenticity piece, you know, when we can kind of, you know, feel your passion and really hear from you that true impact you're making to the people that you serve and the community that you're in, and know that you're constantly reassessing your own programs as well to make sure they're that fit in the long run. That means a lot to me. You know, that really tells me that an organization is in touch with the people they're working with, that they're truly care about what matters most for the community and not just, you know, copy paste a program because they had some success. You know, it's really nice. And I appreciate when I provide a grant and the report back says, hey, we ran into these problems. This was unexpected. We got this feedback. Here's how we're changing this program next year, or here's this shift that we made to make this program better. And to me, those are some of the best things to see, because I know that there's that true connection there. And I am going to have a cat visitor for those of you who said that they like it. He is right here.
Oh my goodness, that's great. Thank you. Yeah, that's really helpful. And Bryan, jump in if you have something else to add. You know, I think just listening to those answers, I'm not sure. I'm scrolling through and seeing a lot of familiar faces from Gail's ethical fundraising panel, and I'm just really thinking about how these conversations are just tying together so beautifully. So if you were there, I hope you're also really enjoying, you know, listening. But if not, please go back and see the recording, because I really just think together this is just a power punch of information. That idea of sometimes the best thing is to have the difficult conversations with funders. Like honesty is the best policy. We all learned it in kindergarten, but it's so true that sometimes needing to communicate, gosh, this program didn't go quite the way that we hoped, or COVID has hit us harder than we anticipated, but this is how we're working on it. And then also ideas too with I've been hearing a lot about Clubhouses building youth leadership councils and getting young people involved in some of the decision making. And gosh, if that doesn't speak to Rodrigo, then I don't know what else does. So some really good tidbits there. Bryan, I saw you unmuted. Do you have something to share?
Yeah, just regarding fundraising during COVID, we last year released all restrictions on our grants, and but we were just surprised, so surprised, and I've heard this from other funders, that everyone still wanted to submit impact reports. So at the end of our grant site period, we require an impact report, and what we told everyone was, what, you don't have to focus on those metrics that you had in your original proposal. We know how tough things were different, but everyone wanted to, even if they were way down, they wanted to talk about why. And we loved hearing that because they were being honest and straightforward. And, no harm came to them because of that, but it's just good to know how they did and what their plans were going forward, and just being, as transparent and open as possible. So that was a really good kind of relationship builder for us and all of our partners.
Here, that capacity of transparency and commitment to, and again, I was going to say commitment to data, but a commitment to show the impact that there is in the community, regardless of whether it's being asked by the funder or not, is a huge mark for authenticity, as Caitlin was saying as well. So yeah, absolutely. There's a question in the chat box that I'd like to address, which is, from Cassandra, say, when we spoke about the use of youth voice within, reports and everything else, and how can we toe the line between authenticity and, exploiting young people, to the benefit of the organization. And the answer to that is that it needs to be done purposely from the very, very beginning, so that youth voice is a major component of what you do, and not just something that you rehearse for a particular effort. So that comes from integral planning in saying, how is youth voice being part of this? The creation of these youth leadership councils, the fact that incorporating young people in the decisions of the program, those are really, really great ways to start incorporating youth voice, to create that sense of ownership, so that when reporting happens, they actually come from the experience of the young people, and not just them spewing out data that we fed them so that they can tell funders. But it is something that very accidentally can be perceived as exploitive. So it just needs to be done very, very purposely and I'm a person that grows from design. Things should always be incorporated as early as possible, measured as much as we can, so that we can, provide them as results, at the time that it's necessary, and then reassess and redesign. Don't be afraid to redesign.
Again, tying so nicely to some conversations I've heard, throughout the conference, making sure that being so intentional and thoughtful, purposeful all along the way is all part of it. And that balance too, I think we started with a bit of the idea that everyone in the organization is a fundraising person, and sort of in the reverse, all fundraisers are also a bit of a program person. So we're all, sharing and wearing multiple hats. Yes, exactly. Really making our little world spin. Well, with that, I would love, you kicked us off, Rodrigo, with answering. I've been slow on the chat here, so but please unmute yourself. Like let's just open it up and see who has questions. Feel free to chat them in, or like I said, unmute and give it a go.
I have a question. This is Bill from Listo America in California. The question has to do a little technicality. A lot of times we pursue grants and we get, let's say, $5,000 grant to buy equipment, update your equipment. You're a high technology organization. How do you react? I would like to ask the funders, or Caitlin and Rodrigo and Bryan, how do you react when the organization says, hey, time out, I appreciate the $5,000, but we really need unrestricted funds to help pay the rent and pay other things. So is that a turnoff to push back and say, can we use some of the money to do this or that? That's kind of a question. And I'll open it to the three funders.
Yeah. And it's a tough one for us too, I will say. We do have our own restrictions and rules in place for the ways we're able to give grants sometimes. Sometimes we can be a little bit more flexible, like Bryan, mentioned earlier. But it goes back to that relationship building. If it's not a use for you, I don't want to provide a grant in which you won't use it or you can't use it or it's not the most beneficial way to provide you funds. If we want to support an organization and your feedback back is we don't need to update our equipment at this time, here's really what we're looking for and what we need, I would be willing to work with an organization that's a longstanding partner on how to make that work. Whether there's unrestricted funds are a piece of it, or what exactly needs to happen, which side of your unrestricted funds, where exactly are you looking for that kind of support? Is it salaries? Is it because your utilities, is something you're really struggling with? And it may have to be a longer conversation. Like I said, we have some of our own things we need to report back on and some of our own kind of rules that we follow when giving grants out, but it's certainly for a organization, a corporation that you have a relationship with, part of the conversation that I think you should, want to have, part of that open conversation.
Yeah, and I would agree that it's really about the relationship. And, with a longer term relationship, there's more trust, know each other better, there's more opportunity. But in any case, I think asking is fine. It's not going to hurt to ask. And, Caitlin mentioned, and we're the same, that we do have, some structures that we have to work within. But it's always worth asking. And there was also a question about asking for multi-year grants. And for us, we have a couple RFPs that we do on a 2-year cycle. So we award 2-year grants for those. But in our discretionary pool, from time to time, we'll do multi-years. It's typically with organizations that we have a longer term relationship with. And that may or may not go forward. So it's unlikely for a first grant. You can still ask, but it's unlikely that we would do that with a first grant, make a multi-year grant.
And on the case of, for example, the Mass Cultural Council or anything, actually, the first thing that you need to do is know your funder. Your funders, as your organization, also have a mission. So they may have very, very clear ideas as to where they want, led by their boards or by design. They have very, very clear ideas of where they want that funding to go. So it may be not possible for the grants officer to grant you what is necessary for operational. And it's just because it's bound to the design of the grant that you're applying for, or to the funding priorities of the organization, which might come from a myriad different places, from board, from original funders, leadership, a lot of things that are not necessarily directly under our control. But as Bryan said, when you let us know this kind of things, we report them out, and that may elicit change eventually. So don't feel that saying thank you so much for the grant, but actually unrestricted funding is necessary for this number of things. We can take note of that, and we can bring it up the wire and say, well, this is what we're getting back from the field, and this is the kind of funding that is necessary at the moment. Also, of course, if you're applying for an equipment grant, it's very unlikely that we're going to be able to shift it into unrestricted unless something major like COVID happens, where I know a lot of programs restricted that kind of needs. But there's a give and take, and there's a relationship building as well. So it also depends on where the funds are going to go and where they're coming from as well. But yeah, know your funder, and what they have to do is really important as well. It makes it easier on us to help you.
That's great. Right back to the title of our session here. So building those relationships today to fund tomorrow. So with those really strong foundations, it sounds like that's when funders have a little bit more flexibility and understanding to be able to go back and make some adjustments. And maybe, you know, first time grantees, it's a little bit tighter constraints there. So I love that idea of just, you know, if you're continuing with the check-ins, or whether it's 6 months or whatever it may be, and keeping people informed and building those strong relationships, you're better off for whenever, you know, something unexpected comes up. Yeah. I see a question in the chat here. I'm wondering if we've answered it, or if any of our panelists have more to say on just how decisions are made about the grant money that goes towards organizations, and again, this idea of communicating need. And I think this question might be perhaps outside of the proposal. Oh, I'm seeing more come through. Let's see. Okay. Are there opportunities to start having discussions about funding with the people who make those decisions?
I think
Yeah.
both.
Can anyone speak to that, Rodrigo?
Yeah, I think both questions actually speak to a little bit of what we were saying before. It all changes very widely from the funder that you're working with. Sometimes it's a very, very strict corporate board that dictates what it's going to be, and sometimes it's a family foundation, and family foundations have a lot more flexibility as to how they allocate funding. So knowing the organization that you're speaking with and what you're asking of them makes it more likely to be successful in what you're asking, I guess. As to who makes a decision, again, it depends on the type of organization. Sometimes the grants are designed with a very, very particular goal in mind. Grants are designed to increase diversity, are going to be funding programs that are working more specifically towards that end. We can't change that because it's on the design. There might be other grants within the organization that are closer to what you need. So take a look at the portfolio, see what's out there. But again, having the conversations is important. One of the things that I've been having in the back of my mind through the whole session is that you do make use of the time that is allotted to you at all times. When applying for programs, we do info sessions, right? How many info sessions, Caitlin and Bryan, how many info sessions have you done where you only have a handful of people when compared to the number of applications?
Yeah,
So
often.
if so if there's a leadway to a program that says, well, due date for this application is in 3 months, and an info session is happening in 1 month, and we are going to be answering questions about that program all the way through the deadline, make use of that time. We are certainly allotting time to answer those questions so that we know that we are funding the right things, that we know that we can help you capture your voice even better in the application, so that it's it has a better chance of being successful. But do use that time. How many times are you filling an application on the night of the due date? We've seen it. We know it. We see the time of input for the programs. We know that. So use the time. A lot of these questions that are coming could be easily answerable and in an amicable and fruitful way ahead of the deadline, not on the day. So do use that time, because we appreciate it and we can be more proficient at helping you be efficient, if that means something.
Absolutely. I see another question in here as well on employee engagement when it comes to funding, and how often that's included and not included, and how to approach an organization to make that kind of partnership. Those are my favorite kinds of conversations. When I know an organization is looking at the relationship holistically and saying, we've got great volunteer opportunities for your employees, we've got great programs, that we want to apply a grant for. It's nice to know that there's a way to build that relationship outside of just the times I have a pool of money to give. It's and for me, I kind of look at it, there are times that I send volunteers when we haven't recently given a grant, when there's a program going on or a way that my employees can really support. And there's times I give grants when we aren't volunteering. I know, with the Clubhouse Network in Boston in particular, most of our employees are in Western Massachusetts. So we've struggled to have, ongoing regular volunteerism. Someone asked this question before about one-time versus mentoring programs. We've struggled to have mentors come in person regularly, to meet students into Boston when they live in Worcester and Marlborough. the virtual world has opened that door a little bit more for us, but also makes mentoring a little bit less impactful for the kids. So it's a trade-off, and I think it's about finding that right fit with the funder. And once your relationship really builds, I know we keep kind of talking about that relationship building piece, but once you get to know them more and your relationship builds and you understand how their employees engage, those connections happen really naturally, and you're able to find those good fits, whether it's one employee one time or a group of employees coming on a regular basis, or something more meaningful. But I think most organizations would be open to the conversation of, we want this relationship to be about volunteerism and grant making and understanding each other, and all working towards the right benefit of engaging people in the community and employees.
That's great. Thank you. Does anyone else have, maybe we have time for one final question? Anyone have a burning question they'd like to ask? I think we're all feeling just like full up, all topped off. So much, juicy, great information. I really, really appreciate that. I think, oh gosh, you're already being called back for an encore. It sounds like someone wants to see you all again, which we would love. In sort of our closing, I would appreciate if just we heard, if you have one thing that you really wish that organizations knew or that they did, could you leave us on a piece of advice?
Yeah, for me, it's, and this has come up, I've mentioned it too, that to think beyond the transactional nature of, proposal, yes or no, think of it more, how can we make a partnership together? Because I think that most funders, and definitely the three of us here today, that's what we're looking for, and welcome the opportunity to have those discussions.
Yeah, and I will say that sometimes, don't get too discouraged by a no. Sometimes, we have to say no, and it could be because that grant funding has run out, or we don't have the type of grant funding available for what you need. And, continue to approach those organizations where you really see that mission fit and that overall synergy with them, and you can really make that connection, because like I said, it could be other places I connect you to within the company, or it could be 2 years from now. Things are always changing on my side as well. So, that's just my advice. Yeah, it's just, keep making sure you're approaching those partners as things are changing and you have new things to share.
I said it before and I'll say it again. Just come to the realization that development is an organization-wide effort. It's not something that lies on a single individual that has it in its title. It's something that can be done very organically if done purposely. Just remember that everything that you engage in as as a facilitator, when a development person asks you, we need some data quantifiable on this, it's to the benefit of the organization and the relationship with funders, and to continue doing the work that we know that is impactful. So remember to work closely with your development staff and development concepts. Work closely with the funders. This is we're not in this because we don't want to see it funded. We actually want to fund as widely as we can, but the only way we can do so is by engaging with the proof and the evidence that we need to show in order to be able to do that. So be purposeful about your development work and work towards creating that data that helps us leverage funds towards your purpose. That's always going to be my thing.
Wonderful. Well, with that, I think we've come full circle. Bryan, Rodrigo, Caitlin, thank you so much for your time. And to all of our wonderful guests, thank you for listening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It was a great pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.
Bye.
Thanks.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.